So today we're here with Jaroslav Romanchuk, our friend from Belarus, and he's been here in Kyiv for a while. So why don't we start? Can you say a few words about yourself so people understand the context of our conversation?
Yeah, I'm from Belarus, but I've been living here for over 1 year. In 2021, the regime accused me of being a terrorist, so I ran from the country, as many compatriots of mine, and I managed to get in here before the war, like 6 months before the war. In Belarus, I've chaired a think tank called Scientific Research Media Center, and at the same time I was involved in politics. I'm presidential candidate. I was vice chairman of the leading liberal political party. While here, we got in touch with Mikhail Saakashvili. He invited me to be a senior economist in the Office for Simple Solutions and Reforms. And since that time, I took part in the drafting, promoting liberal agenda in Ukraine. And when the war started, the same day I was supposed to present the program called Ukraine New West. That is a comprehensive program that covers all areas of life and economy. Unfortunately, we suspended it for obvious reasons. And so during the whole war, I've contributed different areas of activities, including information warfare, humanitarian assistance. You know, I cannot go to war because I'm not fit for carrying weapons. And, as I said, I'm so blind that I cannot shoot a cow within 20-minute range. But I think that participating in working out the program for economic development in the wartime, which I delivered to the government, to the parliament, to the presidential office in May, and also the program for restoration of Ukraine after the war. These are big intellectual products that I worked on, and we are now in the process of advocating these projects based on free market, based on over 30 years of transitional reforms in Eastern Europe, in Central Europe, and in Asia. So what I do as a scholar, I wrote 12 books on different aspects of transition, from Central European economy and totalitarianism to free market and democracy, and that is why I've accumulated much knowledge and expertise on how to do that in the best way.
That's fantastic. So one of the questions I want to ask you as an economist is reparations for war. How are those calculated? What does Ukraine look at after this war?
There are two parts to this question. First, I think that the very simple and easy way to calculate reparation would be to calculate the damage or the compensation for the people who were murdered, who were killed during the war, or wounded somehow, right? And this, you can have different scales and different historical precedents in the past. For example, recently Israel demanded 28 million euro from Germany for 1972 Olympic Games. You remember when 11 athletes were murdered by terrorists, and the accusation was not enough security, and so you can calculate per capita how much it was. You know Lockerbie, of course, when each victim, like the family of each victim, got about 20 million from Gaddafi. There are other cases, so I would think that the starting point for the compensation or reparation on this matter would be like 3-4 million euro per person, and so you can get what number of or the volume of resources necessary for that. Wounded also would be probably like 15% of that sum, but at least 1.5 million euro. The other part of that is the compensation for the country. So again, the highest level of compensation in history was registered when Finland paid compensation to the Soviet Union. Surprise, surprise. That was about 19% of Finland's GDP. Of course, Russia damaged Ukraine and hurt Ukraine much more. So I think that it would be reasonable to start the negotiation with 25-30% of Russia's GDP before the war. It was $1.8 trillion. So you can see that that would be reasonable to start the negotiation from the number like $600-700 billion. So all in all, the overall sum of compensation would be like $1.3-1.4 trillion.
Wow, that's a lot.
Essentially, and you can get part of that in the frozen assets. You can get that via supply of fertilizer, for example. Belarus should also pay compensation for participating in the war, allowing its territory to be used so that Ukraine is attacked. Oil resources, metals, lumber, timber, you name it. So essentially, you can have not just the condensed compensation within 1-2 years, but if you make it 10-15 years, that will be not that painful for Russia. It could restore, so we shouldn't repeat the mistakes that the European Union, European countries made after this First World War, when the big reparation package essentially destroyed German economy and eventually led Hitler to power. So I think that, but this approach I think would be balanced, reasonable, and the first part would be quite easy to get, $300 billion frozen, plus frozen assets of the business people who contributed to the turning Russia into aggressive state, and so we start with $500 billion, quite easy to get, and then resources back, so it will be doable.
So tell me, the sanctions against Russia, sanctions against Belarus are significant, yet their economies have not completely cratered. They're still there. The country's still operating. Why is that? How are they able to survive, and will they be able to continue surviving?
No, Belarus is like a war communist. It's a central planned economy, totalitarian state, and it relies on heavily on a couple of products, like oil products, plus fertilizers, metals, chemicals, and plus it had access to the Russian market, which is quite big. So it's like eventually what you see right now, Belarus is essentially part of Russia. So it lost independence. And apart from formal economy, we have a gray economy. We have like parallel economy, which is operated by gangs, by organized crime people. From 2014, for example, Russian organized crime structures and so semi-gray economy structures conducted anti-sanction delivery of goods through Belarus. And those deliveries were not financed by Belarusian companies or Lukashenko regime, but Lukashenko regime definitely benefit as an intermediary or like repackaging point, cashing like 15-20% of the volume. So that was beneficial to Belarus as a kind of a partner in smuggling schemes. Apart from that, Belarus is not that rich. You know, it's in 2021, its GDP per capita was like $7,500, and the country was like $68 billion. So essentially, the modern authoritarian regime is not like that in the Soviet Union because it's much more open. It let entrepreneurs operate in the country. Of course, the conditions are different, but essentially, even with this limited level of economic freedom, people deliver to themselves. And I would focus on one point that Belarus and Russia in index of economic freedom are higher than even Ukraine.
Really?
So you have three elements of the foundation for development, which is political freedom, civic freedom, and economic freedom. And you must get them together. Otherwise, if you go forward with only two of them, like in Ukraine, and you let economic freedom behind, then you do not get the results. Or you have the results when the benefits are concentrated within the hands of like 1% of the population. And people perceive that as, oh, okay, capitalism, freedom doesn't work, so let's try probably a strong hand as an alternative. So Russia is also, you see, the country of oil, gas, mineral resources, and as it was like 25 years ago, it was a gas station. It's still a gas station, and so nothing changed. All the attempts to do modernization via central authorities, both in Belarus and Russia, failed miserably. So
Why?
The concept itself, the theory of development economics, catching up development, modernization via concentration efforts in the hands of bureaucrats. That's a theory based on some wrong assumptions. The first assumption is that we have noble, omniscient, honest government officials, bureaucrats who know what they do. They know that how to manage other people's money, other people's resources. As it turns out, it's a big, big lie. If you build a theoretical model based on this assumption, you deliberately fail because it doesn't work. It never worked anywhere. You could hardly give me one example from the world of history where such approach worked. You have Taiwan act differently, Japan act differently, South Korea, you have Chile, you have other Ireland. If a country focused on using international aid, international loans in order to speed up modernization through government investment, government consumption, it would end up having in oligarchy, in schemers, in low level of economic development and growth. And that is the case for Belarus and for Russia. Belarus invested about $100 billion into state monitored, state managed projects, and in the last 12 years, its average growth rate was under 1%. In Russia also, the 12 years before the war, before it started war, that was the decade of the lowest economic growth rates after the Second World War. So it never worked. But they have Skolkovo, they have all kinds of fancy ideas how to do modernization. But again, when government officials are involved, then inevitably it leads to corruption, it leads to kickbacks that reached in Russia up to 70-80% of the project.
Well, I'm here from the government to help, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you know, there's a joke between Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine before the war. Like in Belarus, the volume of kickback is like 20-25%. In Ukraine, 35-40%. In Russia, 75-80%. But again, inevitably, if you have the government involved, it leads to corruption. And again, in 30 years, the issue is neither in Russia, nor in Ukraine, nor in Belarus, free market system, free market model had never been tried. So you have three kind of models of development. You have Solos One model of development, which is based on technology. You have the government that helps to set up industrial production and speed up like import substitution. You have export stimulation. It never worked. Then you have endogenous work. Okay, let's do human capital. Let's do involvement and investment in innovation, in research and development. And again, if the government is involved, they always make mistakes. But that's the reason why in Russia and Belarus and in Ukraine, right, people love so-called innovation development is that you can pump like billions and billions of dollars without delivering any results for a full of decades. But then I say, well, sorry, we were wrong because, you know, we have like thousands of different technologies to choose from, and we chose the wrong ones. Sorry.
That's amazing. So, I know you've just finished a book, 500 pages, as you mentioned. Yeah. So tell me about the book in the context of Ukraine. What's needed for Ukraine's economic development?
Yeah. So the book is called Ukraine New West, and it consists of three parts. The first part is theoretical. I analyzed three models that were used in by different countries in different historical times. And essentially, Ukraine moved within the first part, which is called Solos One model. It is widely used also today by IMF, World Bank, EBRD. Again, there's too much government in it, so the government plays a key role. And when at the beginning of the 90s, one of the biggest flaws after the war, after this collapse of the Soviet Union, was that the West did not recognize, did not realize the importance of the theory of government failures. Because, you know, we go through economics, you see market failures, you see perfect competition, you see like noble regulatory power of the government to protect the poor, to like equalize income. But after the collapse of the Soviet Union, we did not start from tabula rasa from scratch. We started when the people who were in charge of soft power, charge of networking organizations, which were the most important ones, KGB, you had police, you have party, you have youth organizations. So those guys were not Democrats. They didn't like freedom. They didn't like open competition. So what they got from the West, from economists, from those who come as consultants, was this: okay, you guys still in the center of economic development and planning. Let's do it. And they loved the idea, and they moved the countries in the wrong direction. So the second model is the model, and that's also in my book. It's called Romer model, based on endogenous growth. When you invest in innovation, invest in human capital, in research and development, and you have, again, the government is very important. If private business don't do that because it doesn't know how to do that, it doesn't have enough experience. So essentially the assumption is as follows. Again, government officials, ministers, some think tankers or National Academy of Science people know. How do they know? They want to make money because they are as poor as church mice. And again, they discredit the whole idea of development. While the third model, which is abandoned by most of transitional countries, is what I call the model of entrepreneurial growth, where private business, is the center. It's based on ideas and recommendations of Mises Schumpeter, and I also wrote 12 books dedicated to developing this model. So we have a lot of the second part of the book is dedicated to analyzing the experience, historical evidence, facts, how different countries moved on and what would it led to. So there's a lot of information on failures of development economics, development via IMF, World Bank, EBRD programs, and why we should choose a different path. Ukraine had 3 chances itself. You had 2005, Orange Revolution, you have Dignitary Revolution 2014, you have Green Revolution 2019, and inevitably it moved through it was like a path dependence on, but dependence was on oligarchs, on skimmers, on what I call the model of overwhelming government interventionism. And my idea is to try something that worked. One of my books is called In Search of Economic Miracle, where I analyzed 12 countries which made it from rags to riches within 1 or 2 generations. And it's really very simple. You have, of course, the government has a role to play. But the government, after the war in Ukraine, must be limited and must be within so-called straitjacket. The straitjacket must limit the government on government expenditures, on inflation, on budget, on volume of assets in the hands of those who run other people's money, other people's resources. Once you have it, you minimize populism, which is a grave threat to Ukraine and to any other developing countries. And then you work in the atmosphere of political competition, open civil freedom, and its key importance is to institutionalize economic freedom, which again, it's a shame that Ukraine still is on the 126th place. It's an unfree country. So it's really, I think that's a kind of a betrayal of intellectual and political elite to the people that suffered, that fought for free Ukraine. And unfortunately, political parties, presidents, parliaments never delivered. So, and surprise, surprise, I was also surprised that there hasn't ever been a program worked out and presented to politicians which would describe how to move from where we are to this ideal of free Ukraine, free politically, from the civic perspective and economically. That's the whole book.
That's fantastic. Listen, thank you for coming today. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.